Welcome to Memescape. This is a podcast about internet memes. I'm Aiden Walker, and this is the first episode, so hopefully it goes well. You might know me from TikTok, where I yap about Skibbity Toilet and other memes, or you might know me from my Substack blog, How to Do Things with Memes, or from my work at Know Your Meme or other outlets. But really, what I want to do with this podcast is first of all, discuss internet culture, which I love and am passionate about, and like think more people should take more seriously. And then second, to have a venue where I can cold email researchers, reporters, content creators that I admire and say, hey, tell me about XYZ, come on my podcast. And then hopefully they'll do it and I'll get to hear what they have to say and you'll get to hear it too. And so, without further ado, this episode is just me yapping alone about an interest of mine, which is Distracted Boyfriend, a 2017 object labeling meme that I did my master's thesis on. So, Distracted Boyfriend, it's one of the more iconic memes out there. Even people who aren't into meme culture will recognize this image of a guy walking with a girl, and then he's looking at the behind of another girl walking past him, and his girlfriend is getting angry at him. People put words on top of the picture, and it became a viral joke trend in the summer of 2017. Like a lot of memes, there's a funny aspect to it, but people also used it to make kind of serious points about the way they saw the world. You see examples of this meme that are talking about politics, that are talking about really deep personal dilemmas. And for me, when I look at Distracted Boyfriend or any other kind of meme, what I see first and foremost is the way that it expresses human problems, human feelings. And to me, that's no different from any other kind of art. And so for my master's thesis, which was a history literature master's thesis, I decided let's look at Distracted Boyfriend like the way one would look at a poem, and spend a few pages really sitting with it, reflecting on it, thinking deeply about it, but then also look at it as a kind of historical document. Because history is made out of what's in the archive. The way we know that something happened on a given date, or the way we know that X group of people felt a certain way about what happened on a given date is because of the stuff they left behind. So it can be letters, it can be diary entries, it could be, official government documents, it could be novels, it could be works of art, it could be, archaeological evidence. And every kind of, artifact or document has its own quirks. So there's different ways to interpret them, different things to keep in mind. And if we think about the history of the internet and the history of today, memes are a very specific kind of historical artifact that we are leaving behind to our future selves and also to the future generations. And so I kind of wanted to theorize a little bit like, how do we work with them? How do we get information out of them? Other questions being sort of, how do we deal with them ethically? How do we, make sure that we're telling stories correctly, that we're leaving room for the stories that we don't know how to tell right now? Because ultimately, I think what responsible historical practice is all about is about respons is about responsibility. Yeah, of course, it's responsible for historical practice is about responsibility, but I think it's really about um, leaving room inside of the record. It's not saying I'm telling 100% the truth of the matter here because you can't. It's about leaving the outlines there, the dots for other people to connect to tell a different story, to rub the record against the grain was how a teacher once put it to me, and to really read within what is there questions that wouldn't even occur to you as the archivist or as you embodied in who you are, stuff wouldn't even occur to you to ask. And so, what I'm getting at kind of inarticulately here, I suppose, is Distracted Boyfriend as a meme, as a very relevant, iconic meme, was an interesting thing for me to study because I wanted to think about how we would A, do history through memes in the future, and B, how we are doing art through memes right now. And so I think I really am the world's leading expert on Distracted Boyfriend. I say this, I don't think it's a flex, I think it's a fact. I'm proud of it, but I also am aware that I might be a big fish in a small pond, or maybe the only fish in a puddle. But this episode is going to be about what I learned looking at Distracted Boyfriend, what I know or think I know, and kind of what I think is going on with this general group of object labeling memes. So, the life of Distracted Boyfriend begins in 2015. That's when the stock photo gets taken by Antonio Guillem, who is a Spanish stock photographer. It's taken so that he can sell it on these big stock photo platforms that, people will charge 15 bucks or whatever for a website or a blog to use the photo. And there's a scholar, Paul Frosch, who's done really interesting work on stock photography marketplaces. But the real interesting thing is there's this aesthetic to them. They're generic, which means they're really specific in that, for example, Distracted Boyfriend, it's a very specific situation illustrating jealousy. But at the same time, they feel like they're pictures of cliches or something. They're very broad, they're very stereotypical. And so hitting that note is very profitable for these photographers based on the incentives of the platform because people are looking for pictures to very quickly illustrate a point or a situation for their product or their blog. And Distracted Boyfriend definitely fits into that corpus. At the same time, Distracted Boyfriend definitely is an image that he's having some fun with. He's expressing himself. The models are having fun with it and expressing themselves. And so it's this fusion kind of a human desire to kind of color outside the lines a little bit to do something funny, kind of paired with this marketplace logic that is technologically mediated of the stock photo site that, because customers are going to ask for a certain kind of photo, the algorithm there and the marketplace optimizes for that kind of photo. And then the photographers who are freelancers usually will take that kind of photo, and ultimately, these sort of automated systems, which are made of one part kind of human, consumer desires, and another part, the algorithm, whatever, end up sort of driving visual representation and culture. And around this time in the mid 2010s, we're seeing tons of stock photo based memes. So, like Hide the Pain Herald is a big example. And then other ones like the one where the guy's pouring the big thing of little olive oil, and I think there's sort of this folk internet fascination with this sort of generic type of image. It's sort of like the image that's of nothing but something really specific at the same time, and that's just very funny to people. And I think as people are seeing more and more of visual culture around them being dominated by not just stock photos, but kind of generic media in general, memes sort of are this way of examining that and being like a release valve to understand it. And I see Distracted Boyfriend fitting into that tradition, definitely. And for a long time, Distracted Boyfriend is just one of many stock photos on this site. The earliest meme posting of it dates back to January 2017. It was found by the Tumblr blog Meme Documentation, which is one of the goats in the field, definitely. It's always possible that there's an earlier posting. But when you're trying to look at stuff in the past on the internet, the archive that exists of old memes and old internet culture is very unstable. It's filled with holes. And half the time, like meme documentation did to find these early distracted boyfriend posts, you're crawling through obscure Facebook groups that, they're either privated or they're deleted or, the whatever has been taken down by the platform as a content moderation thing. And so it's often hard to pinpoint the exact roots. But the earliest meme usages of Distracted Boyfriend are on this Turkish political Facebook group in January 2017. And they're using it kind of in the way that it would get used in the classic sense later on. But there isn't much viral spread. Maybe it was a little hit in these Facebook groups, but it doesn't spread beyond until August 2017. There's one post on Twitter that catalyzes this massive viral trend. That post is the famous one of the boyfriend is the youth, the girlfriend is capitalism, and the woman in red walking by is socialism. And after this post, it goes totally viral and it follows a very 2017 life cycle of virality. So the original post is August 19th, and by like August 21st, 22nd is everywhere on the internet. There's all these listicles being written. There's all these little explainers aiming for an SEO hit that, because people are going to Google where does this meme come from, and you want your article to pop up. So journalists are writing those articles to Google will select them and serve them, and they'll get page views and thus advertising revenue. And then by the end of that first week, we start to see on Reddit and these other platforms like the meta memes that are now memes about the fact that this meme is popular. And it kind of goes through that life cycle. And then after that, Distracted Boyfriend does something which not every meme does, in that it sticks around. And there's still Distracted Boyfriend memes posted today. There were a bunch of different revivals of the meme where people would find, some new image, most notably the one where the genders are flipped, and they'd recaption it and post it again. And so Distracted Boyfriend has really become this meme that stuck around. And that was one of my reasons for studying it. Distracted Boyfriend is a meme that even people who don't really like memes know about. And it's also a meme that sort of touches on something. I'm not going to say it's eternal because that sounds a little too lofty, but something that's persistently on people's minds, which is this thing of like making a choice between an older option, the girlfriend, and a newer option, the woman in red. But in a more specific way, tied to its historical context, Distracted Boyfriend comes about at the same time as the Me Too movement, and it's a picture of gross, harassing male behavior. It comes about in 2016, 2017, this moment where people are starting to realize that the platforms are all about surveillance, and it's a picture of surveillance. The girlfriend is surveilling the boyfriend is surveilling the woman in red. And the internet culture journalists I talked to, because in my thesis I'm trying to like get this account of sort of how the meme went viral, they would always say stuff to me like 2016, 2017 is sort of a hinge point because it's the moment when the normies logged on, where you sort of realize that the internet is not kind of a subculture, but it's just the cultural mainstream now. And I think reading through the coverage of Distracted Boyfriend and meme culture, the internet in general from this era, you start to get that sense. It's right after the Trump election and Brexit, which were two events that kind of clarified to people the power and maybe the danger of this new medium. And for me, this era of meme culture is just very rich in so many ways. If you think of a lot of the iconic memes we still use today, their origins are often like 2017, 2018. But kind of before Distracted Boyfriend or any meme represents like a historical moment or a cultural concept, you kind of have to see it as like what it is, which in the case of Distracted Boyfriend is an image, pieces of text that get copy and pasted on top of it, but also more than that. I see memes as elements in an online space and also as actions performed in that space. So posting isn't just sharing, it's a performance. It's done in front of a live audience, and the post itself ends up becoming part of a space. It takes up a section of Twitter or is a post on a new subreddit, and it helps kind of create the vibe of that community. Memes are both the content that's inside of a community and also the container of it. A meme, whether you get it or not, that kind of creates the boundary between if you're in the in group or if you're outside of it. This sense of spatiality comes back to like how we talk about the internet in general. We have web addresses. You go to a website, you're on a platform, which is, comes from the idea of like a stage. And so seeing memes this way, it doesn't end at the edges of the image. It extends into the posts and the replies that happen, the reposts, the likes. I think it's a little bit like a tree. So you have leaves attached to trees and they have the veins inside of them. And if you look at those veins, it looks the same as like the twigs coming off the branch, of the branches coming off of the bigger branches, of the branches coming out of the trunk. And so I think memes are a little like the leaves, and then the whole internet is the trunk, in that the structure of a meme, how it spreads, how it coordinates and moves attention, you could reverse engineer that back to kind of understand the trunk. So what I'm saying here is that memes are kind of like fractals. They reflect these broader patterns in the internet, and every time we interact, even with maybe just 100 other people who liked the meme, there's patterns and things we do in that interaction that reflect the way we as an entire population move on the internet. Now that's an idea that I know I can't really prove, but as I'm going into it, I think it's a better kind of definition of meme than the stuff that's usually out there. Maybe I'll make another podcast about this, but like meme, of course, begins from Richard Dawkins and this analogy to evolution and biology that I think just doesn't really track. And then in 2013, 2014, we get a more practical definition from Limor Schiffman, sort of about how memes are these online objects that share certain qualities of content, form, and stance. And so what I'm not really redefining it. I'm really going with the Schiffman definition. But my view of how we can use a meme as a historical document, kind of with that Schiffman definition, is to understand that its content, its form, and its stance reflect larger patternings in the content, form, and stance of online communities, and then therefore in the content, form, and stance of the internet itself as a discursive space that we're trying to study, that we're trying to get information out of. In my view, the key thing that looking at Distracted Boyfriend as an image teaches us about the internet as a whole is that so often what we're doing online isn't looking at something in the world, but looking at someone else looking at it and judging that other person's look. So in the distracted boyfriend image itself, we begin with the boyfriend looking at the woman in red. He's making a judgment. He thinks she looks good. Then we have the girlfriend looking at the boyfriend. She sees his reaction and his gaze at the woman in red, and the girlfriend in blue has a judgment of his look, right? So she feels like his, leering looks bad. She's angry at him. And then we're looking at the girlfriend's reaction to the boyfriend's reaction to the woman in red, and we're asked to judge it. And so people will put on the specific captions, they'll fit it to a certain situation, they'll interpret the meme, and then they perform this interpretation in front of a broader public, which then looks at the captions judging the girlfriend's judgment of the boyfriend's judgment of the woman in red and comes to a conclusion about it. And then as the meme shows up on your Twitter scroll, you look at all the sort of the metadata. How many likes does it have? What are people saying in the responses? And you're judging those other people's judgment of the meme maker's judgment of the girlfriend's judgment of the boyfriend's judgment of the woman in red. I think that chain, I've articulated it right, but I might have gotten lost somewhere in there. But anyways, we all are getting lost in the sauce here. That's what I think distracted boyfriend and memes like it teach us, in that we're so involved in these kind of forms of spectatorship that are very multi-layered. We're looking through other people, looking at other people. And this way of seeing, I think, really changes how we situate ourselves in social groups, in space, in time, because it's like totally individualized. You're not being addressed by a meme really as a member of a public. You're being addressed as you. You're being asked to give your own judgment, give your own reaction. And then you're also being addressed kind of as allied with the maker of it. When you're reading a novel, you have this feeling that the writer, if they're good, is like very smart and they're performing things and coordinating things in front of you. And it kind of relies on this distance. You can't communicate with the writer. You are there watching, digesting passively what they're doing. But with a meme, it's sort of someone is asking you with a meme, like, do you agree with how I'm interpreting this image, how I'm interpreting this online event that we all watch together? And so that I think coordinates publics in a different sense. And it makes us feel differently about how we fit into social groups. There's also a temporality suggested in Distracted Boyfriend. We have the boyfriend's look at the woman in red that precedes the girlfriend's look at the boyfriend, which then precedes the memer's interpretation and look at the image, adding the words, and then that adding of the meme captions precedes when we're looking at the post. And so as we look through these different looks, we also get a narrative of kind of layered interpretations where the person after is always judging the person before. And in a way, that narrative doesn't work like left to right, lengthwise, sort of the way the pages in a book will work as you turn them. It works by going in deeper. And the deeper you go into the image, the further back in the past you are. And to me, this mirrors the way that computer interfaces work, in that, like, if you're looking at your laptop screen, you have one rectangle, and then you open up an app and there's another rectangle inside of that rectangle. If the app is an internet browser, you go to the website and then the site is inside of the browser window, which is inside of the screen display. And then on the site, you'll have like an embed inside of the page, which, like, in HTML code will literally be like a div nested inside of another div. And so then you have a rectangle inside a rectangle inside a rectangle inside the screen, which is another rectangle. And each of these rectangles is a different social situation. There's different parties involved in controlling it, whether those parties are human or machine, and it's a different like vibe, and we're just so used to manipulating these things and moving them around and layering and relayering them because this is a mode of seeing that ends up becoming a mode of being as well. We know we're constantly being looked at. We know that we're constantly looking at other people. And of course, people have always been judging each other like throughout history, but they haven't been judging each other through these interfaces that allow you to sit alone and judge other people, that allow you to judge other people's judgments of other people's judgments, and so on and so on. The sort of mise en abîme of like a meme that has so many layers that the original is just totally effaced by people who have, kept on interpreting and reinterpreting it. And so that's kind of how I read Distracted Boyfriend and most memes in general. They have this layered structure where you're looking at someone else's looking all the time. And so then what you have to do is go to each layer and say, who's doing the looking? How do they understand A, what they're looking at, and then who's looking at them, B, and then what does that tell you about how they're placed in the world, how they'd like to be placed in the world? These questions of how people see one another, how they see their communities, how they see themselves are the questions in history that interest me the most. I was never like a war history guy wanting to know about, when battles were. I was never like an economic or political kind of historian or history nerd either. I am most interested in like what were the vibes like in 1847? What did people care about? How did it feel when people fell in love, in the 1700s? And for that, the best thing is to like read art and look at, the way that feelings were expressed. Because I don't know about y'all, but often like I won't know what I feel until it is expressed. And I think that's often something that happens to human beings throughout time. The way we feel, the way we think is really shaped by the tools we have to share it with other people because all knowledge, all feeling is social, essentially. And so looking at memes as a historical document, what I'm trying to get at is that history of mentalities, that history of feelings. And that also will help you lead into all the other kinds of history. Even say that if you were a war historian, there's many great war historians, like reading the diaries of soldiers, the kind of writing they used or the letters they wrote back home, what kind of language was in there? How did they describe their own experiences? What narratives were there? One of the most, this is totally off topic, but I had this woman, Gertrude Bell, who was in World War I, very controversial for various reasons. But anyway, she was working with the British, like Lawrence of Arabia, kind of area, and she kind of ended up being essentially one of the founding mothers of the state of Iraq. But she was this woman who throughout her whole life was kind of like more into, exploring the desert, going off on her crazy side quests. But she did fall in love with this one dude. And he was like a British colonial officer or something in Persia. And they knew each other in London kind of before the war broke out, and he ended up being, into the army to go fight at Gallipoli. And they have all of her papers preserved at the British Museum, and you can read into it, and they're letters that they're exchanging as he's deploying to Gallipoli. And half the letters are like on his end being like, I'm a little scared. Like dead ass bro, like I would be too. Like he's about to go to Gallipoli, it's like a bloody battle. And then the other half is him sort of being like, oh, she's very lonely, she's very anxious. And you could tell their relationship, like maybe I'm projecting too much into it. I swear I'm gonna get back to Distracted Boyfriend. Is that he was married, she was kind of the other woman, but he also kind of knew that, she didn't have a lot of romantic experience. And there's all these references to the fact that, they didn't seem to have consummated their relationship. But anyway, so half the time he's scared and half the time he's trying to console her. And half the time in her letter, she's trying to perform that like she feels like she has been, consoled, that he doesn't need to worry about her. She's going to be strong or whatever. And then the other half, she's, scared because he's going to Gallipoli. And then for her own part, she's scared because the world's at war and she has tons of friends who are also going off to the war. And you see them both caught in this total chaos. And then he dies at Gallipoli. And there's like one or two letters where she's writing, knowing that the post is slow or whatever, and she's been reading about the battle in the newspapers, and like, that he's dead. Um, but anyways, so reading those letters, like, you get into those feelings, and it's like I could, empathetically imagine modern people like feeling that way, but like we wouldn't write about it the way that the Edwardians in the 1910s were writing about it, like the narratives that he sort of had in place to describe himself in Gallipoli were these, chivalric, like noble war narratives, which World War One, of course, shattered because it was so horrible or whatever. And you see both of them kind of dealing with this expectation of what a normal heterosexual relationship would be like at the time, and that Gertrude Bell is not really a normal person. She's like a genius. She's gonna go out to the desert and like found countries. She's not gonna be a housewife. And they're both kind of dealing with those expectations, which on the one hand are, very sort of material social things that you could describe as such. But on the other hand, the way that we actually meet them and have access to them now, 100 years later, is through the literary, artifact and the forms that they use to express themselves. And in a way, that's the ruin that's left of that whole complex of feeling, that whole world, which, was bad in many ways, was beautiful in many ways, was, I mean, just as screwed up and complicated as our own world. And so with memes, with Distracted Boyfriend, 2017 is not as long ago as 1915 at Gallipoli. But I get that same, feeling that you can, reach back into the past and like through these forms, kind of touch on them in this deep way that preserves, like it's the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole iceberg underneath of the way it really felt like to be around at that time. And with memes specifically, because a lot of us were alive during the time that these memes came from, I think they offer this really unique opportunity to reflect on recent history. And for people of the future, they're going to be, just as trippy and moving as those Gertrude Bell letters are to me. And if you ever have a spare moment and you just want to be like sad, look those up. As I said, I'm not like approving of Gertrude Bell or her boyfriend's conduct necessarily. I just find that so interesting. And I've had a million stories like that, where you look at some historical source and it just jumps out at you and you're like, oh my God, these people were people, but they're people in a way that you are not people, like, like I'm not like that, but I kind of feel myself like water poured into a glass of some weird shape. I'm like, most of the time I'm poured into a milk jug, but when I read those letters and I imagine myself in their shoes, it's like I'm being poured into, a really slender, tall vase, and it's a different feeling, it's a different vibe. And letters, memes, novels, plays, literary forms to me are like those different kinds of containers that you can pour human feelings and human experience into. And then once you get used to kind of being a certain kind of bottle, that kind of becomes who you are, you know? So, anyways, I'm hoping to continue this podcast, do more episodes. Future ones won't just be me yapping. Like I said, I'm most interested in doing interviews with people, in learning more about the work that's going on around the internet. But that's kind of where I'm coming from in terms of my approach. I read this like it's poetry, I read it like it's paintings, and I'm very interested in sort of this idea of POV. Who do you think is watching you, and what do you think of the people you are watching? And that's also a theme I'm touching on in my Skibbity Toilet series on TikTok. The entire show is filmed from this camera head perspective. And so there's never like a third person camera the way there is in movies. We're never just supposed to be suspending our disbelief and watching something, forgetting that there's a director and a cinematographer behind the camera. We're always watching through this camera head. And so we're never just watching the action on screen, we're watching the camera head's interpretation of that action and we're questioning its interpretation. And I think our generation, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, millennials, sort of do this automatically in a way. This is the way we watch the world. We don't just watch it, we watch other people's watching of it. And that's the really revolutionary thing about this technology to me. That's the way it's changed the way we orient in time and space and socially. It's kind of introduced this, I don't even know what to call it, this like indirect watching, maybe. Anyways, thank you for listening to my yapping. Hope you have a good rest of your day, week. And if you like this podcast, help me out with the algos. Give it a follow, give it a comment, a like, recommend it to your network, and hopefully I'll be able to get into some really cool stuff and talk to some really cool people. So yeah, have a good one.